Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm doing terribly because I'm not calling up what I was supposed to be calling up.
Yeah, you look kind of distracted, and I don't want to say unprepared, but you look kind of distracted by something you would hope to have ready by the beginning of this little podcast.
Yes.
But so,
Here.
how should I spend time? I can juggle.
This is
David
what
Gergen,
I have.
the great David Gergen. You're showing us a picture of him.
I'm showing you an attractive picture of David Gergen because, Bob.
Yes.
This is the point at any presidential administration where you have to call in
David Gergen.
You call in David Gergen to fix things.
Now, for our younger viewers, he was the omnipresent, nominally initially Republican, but almost transpartisan sage who frequented the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour and who was once referred to in a column by Michael Kinsley, although I think Mike was quoting somebody as, quote, do you remember this quote?
Goggle-eyed melonhead.
A goggle-eyed melonhead.
I think he was quoting Jack Schaefer.
Well, then it's twice as important a quote.
But you know, Biden's poll numbers are worse than Trump now. Nobody thought it was possible.
Yeah.
It's bizarre because he's not doing that badly, but somehow people don't like him, and that's when you call in David Gergen, when you have a messaging problem.
Mm-hmm.
And it's strange that Biden's tack instead is to keep the team that's gotten him in this mess, and also to suck up to the base. Basically, his strategy is, okay, we're going to put the Build Back Better bill on hold, and we're going to have a big January 6th celebration where the base is happy, and then we're going to have a big voting rights debate that is going to go nowhere, but it'll please the base because we'll be seen as fighting. And then maybe we'll get back to actually doing something in a month or two. He's put off the State of the Union until March 1st.
He has?
Historically late, because he thinks he can get back to his Build Back Better bill and pass something before March 1st. It's his being so scared of the base and constantly having to treat the base with kid gloves is bizarre. I mean, it's a little like Newsweek, where we were writing for the people in the Midwest who we didn't know, so we were constantly scared of them. What would they think? He's excessively scared of the base.
What is it you think he should do aside from demand that we add a work requirement to the child tax care credit?
It's clear what he should do. And Jonathan Chait has called on him to do it too. Manchin has made an offer. Okay, he said he'll go along with a bill that has three components: one, universal pre-K; two, shoring up Obamacare; and three, spending, I think it was $500 billion on green initiatives. Okay, he should take that deal immediately, pass it before Manchin changes his mind, and accept the win. Say, okay, not only do we do infrastructure, but we have this pre-K bill, and it's doing great green things, and it's shoring up Obamacare. So that's two wins. I'm on a roll. And then he can build from there.
It sounds great to your ears because you don't care about any of the issues, any of the elements he'd be jettisoning. But there are people in his coalition who do. I assume that's the source of his reluctance.
Well, but you take what you can get. No, he thinks he has to let them go through this theater. He did do that with infrastructure, and it worked. Okay, he let them reject the infrastructure bill and embarrass Pelosi, and then they came back and then they accepted it. So once they get their theater out of the way, then, I guess their electoral needs are happy, and Ms. Jayapal can concede. And I guess the theory is that if we let them have their feudal voting rights push, then they can come back and maybe amend the Electoral Count Act, which is sort of more important, or then we'll have their votes for this partial Build Back Better bill. But I mean, he's getting like 30%. You take 30%. You take what you can get. That's politics.
I don't know. I don't know enough to say. I mean, I know generically the kind of pressure he faces from both directions, and beyond that, I don't know. I don't know what to say. He probably understands the dynamics of his coalition better than you do, or at least somebody in the White House does. Although I've got to admit, it seems like a pretty not well-run White House to me.
He doesn't understand the dynamics of how to make himself popular. That's for sure.
Well, no, but you said yourself he's not doing that badly. It's a messaging problem. So it's not like you have a messaging solution. What you just outlined isn't really a messaging solution. What's your messaging solution?
Legislative achievements is part of the solution. Yes. And being moderate. I mean, the conventional wisdom has shifted in the last week. The conventional wisdom used to be Biden's gone way too left for the electorate. Now the conventional wisdom is Biden's gone way too left for the Democratic Party. Okay, he's appealing to
John
Thomas Edsall and Michael Barone, two of the smarter people.
Well, Michael Barone is no lefty for sure.
Well, but Edsall is. So fact that they're both saying the same thing, even in their own coalition. There calls for
what are the radically left things? I mean, you don't even know what he does want to salvage and build back better, right? So how can you say whether or not that positions him far left?
It doesn't matter what he wants to salvage; it's what he can get through Manchin, and Manchin has made him an offer.
No, but here's my question. Here's my question: if you're saying he's too far left from the Democratic Party, what's the evidence? What is it that he's trying to hang on to and build back better? That's just too far left for the Democratic Party. You don't know what he's trying to hang on to.
The too far left parts are mainly the Black Lives Matter and crime and those issues.
What do you want him? What's he doing on that? New
York is a Democratic city. They just elected a mayor who was not in favor of defunding the police.
Well, they also apparently elected a district attorney who according to some headlines, is saying that if all you do is commit armed robbery, I promise not to send you to jail. Surely that's a mischaracterization, but that's the headline.
It's armed robbery, where there's no real public danger, which means you don't have bullets in the gun, I believe, which is insane because how do people know whether you have bullets in the gun? I mean, it's obviously inherently dangerous.
So seriously, the DA in New York is saying if you commit armed robbery, but it turns out there's no bullets in your gun, I promise you won't spend a day in jail?
It's a misdemeanor. I don't know if that means you won't spend a day in jail. Yeah. But,
even I.
Okay.
And we know how radically left I am. Even I wonder about the wisdom of this. So in your view, I assume yesterday's January 6th speech by Biden was an attempt to rally the base, right? It wasn't exactly an overture to Trumpists.
No, but everybody, and finally, at least he's opening up, and the staff is sort of talking about their deliberations, but they're trying to portray it as, well, we felt this was the moment to attack Trump. Well, no, it's also, we'd run out of things to do. Everything we were doing wasn't working. So what do you do? What do you do when you're at the bottom? You try something else, and also you suck up to your base. So they did those two things. They called in John Meacham. Bob, I know you like that.
Wait, did he write the speech?
He helped.
This confirms my view that guy is 100% worthless at best. At best.
Well, what was so terrible
that's
about
a generous
the speech? I mean,
estimate.
it went on, and it was.
Hey, you know what? I'm about to give you an excellent. We don't arrange these things. We never intentionally set each other up. We don't talk at all before the podcast about what we're going to talk about at all. We don't exchange emails about it. We work without a net. But as it happens, that's an excellent segue, Mickey. Thank you. I actually queued up part of Biden's speech to play. And it's an example of how bad the speech writing is in the following sense. Look, I have found, of course, his speech was all about how corrupt the Stop the Steal movement was and everything. I have found that the most effective way to convince people who haven't been paying much attention that Trump is totally full of shit about the election is the following. You say, you know how Trump was running around and saying there was fraud? Well, and you know how he sent a lot of lawyers to a lot of courts to make the case that to do things that would overturn the election? Did you know that not one of those lawyers ever claimed in court that there had been fraud or introduced a single piece of evidence? that even according to the lawyer was evidence of fraud. So while Trump was going around saying, folks, we've all seen the video where in Atlanta they pull those boxes out from under the table. Well, there is a video. I assume if it could withstand scrutiny, one of his lawyers might have brought it up in court because after all, it's the kind of thing you could bring up in court. Okay, that's the way I put it. Now listen to the way Biden made the same point in his speech, okay? Maybe you'll say he did a better job, but here it is.
Election.
Oh, shit. Come on. Now, am I going to have to sit through a whole commercial now? The things you have to do.
4 seconds.
I am going to play this. I am going to play this because it's so bad. Okay, I'm going to turn down the volume until it gets to 40 seconds, lest anything else I try disrupt the whole process. You have 10 seconds to say things.
Is it Meach-a-Mask? Is he talking about restoring our soul?
No, it isn't that. It's just how badly he makes the point.
In a full and free and fair election.
So it's about 3 seconds.
There's simply zero proof the election results are inaccurate. In fact, in every venue where evidence had to be produced, an oath to tell the truth had to be taken, the former president failed to make his case. Just think about this.
Okay. Now, he's asking us to take his word for the fact that Trump failed to establish fraud in court. Isn't it much more powerful to say not one of his lawyers even alleged fraud or introduced evidence allegedly establishing fraud? I mean, seriously, am I crazy? Or is this just super bad?
Alleged fraud in court.
Well, this is what he's talking about. He's saying in no venue where an oath was taken, okay, did he make the case? Maybe I'm crazy and my way of putting it is not superior, but I'm not. It is. And this is just like, what did he mean? What does that mean? What image does that put in people's heads? I'm sorry.
He's given up. He's sort of not trying to convince people. He's trying to talk to his base and reaffirm that he's on their side.
Yeah, but he should at least give them talking points they can use on social media and stuff that they can repeat. I mean, I'm sorry. Maybe I'm too worked up about this. But
I think you're worked up about a kind of a fine point, but
no, it's not a fine point.
I accept the point.
Okay, but look, it's the White House. He's the president of the U.S. Wouldn't you think he'd have speechwriters who could do the best job possible just about of making every point he's going to make?
His speechwriting shop is not very impressive. On the other hand, he seems, they're writing in his voice and he's involved in it, so it's going to be a Biden-esque muddle.
It would be more Biden-esque to do the plain talking version of it that I did. I don't want to dwell on this forever, but here's a larger point. I think I just see incompetence in a lot of places in this White House. From the State Department, which isn't technically in the White House, but on down. And I think
there was a big article in the Washington Post on how the CDC has approached the pandemic that confirmed your opinion, but go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's been pretty bad. And this is sheer conjecture. Tell me what you think about this theory as to why the level of competence seems so low. I think it has to do with his cognitive decline, which I'm not saying is dementia or anything, but I don't mean that just in the sense that, hey, he's too dim-witted to choose good people. I think, he's not totally on top of it. He certainly, at his age and his level of cognitive development, is not in touch with all the best and the brightest. So he's got to rely on people for that. But I think because of the cognitive issue, their rule of thumb was, we've got to get loyalists. We don't want leaks coming out of this White House about how, he fell asleep during whatever. And I think they put a big emphasis on people they could trust. And that's one reason, at least in the national security realm, they just imported his Senate staff. They didn't look around for the, those big Brzezinskis of today or something.
Yeah. That's not the case with the CDC thing. I mean, with the CDC thing, he appointed this woman, Walensky, I think, Rochelle, to head the CDC, and she just puts out the guidance without coordinating with the rest of the administration, because she's an independent agency. And that's sort of what she's supposed to do. It's insane. You would think that they would all get together and say, okay, today we're going to say that you don't need to get tested after 5 days. And here's our argument. We're all on the same page, right? They don't do that. She puts it out there and then Fauci contradicts her and then they change the policy. And it's just wacky. It's like excess faith and expertise. We put the experts in there and they do their thing and we don't bother. I mean, that's why they need David Gergen to have like a single message.
Well, that's not quite a Gergen issue. I mean, that's an organizational issue. I mean, Trump did a better job of that, of unifying the voice.
Right. Well, it's a sort of, yes, you wouldn't, it's the sort of thing that Gergen did messaging, but I just mean you need somebody there who says, and you'd think that's why he has Mike Donilon and all those people, Rod Klain. It's to say, okay, we have to speak, we have to get our act together before we go public.
This is a little thing, but cutting it from 10 days to 5 days, I just think 5 is a bad number. It just sounds too much like a seat of the pants decision. Oh, we thought we'd cut it in half. I mean, make it 6 days or something. It sounds like it was. Make it sound like you had to get your calculator out to make the decision.
She claimed to have some evidence that after 5 days you stop being really infectious. That most of the infection is in the first 5 days.
I would still go with 6. 5 just sounds fishy. It does.
Anyway, to put January 6th to bed.
We haven't even started to talk about January 6th, but go ahead.
Okay. Well, it's absurd to they made too much of a fuss about it. I thought Bill Kristol was right when he said, why can't they just have a moment of silence and get back to business? Soon we're going to be going to buying a car at the January 6th clearance sale. Hey. All cars must go.
I would love
that. And the smartest thing, the freshest take actually that I saw was somebody retweeting Azealia Banks, the rapper. I believe she's a very well-educated rapper, but she's a rapper, and said, "This is meth behavior. The climbing the walls of the Capitol is what you do when you're hopped up on meth." And that's a role that's something that hasn't been written about that much. Is how many of these people were on drugs at the time? They were sure acting like they were on drugs.
I don't. It's funny. I heard the Times Daily podcast did a whole thing where they had actors read the transcript of an FBI interviewer of one of the people who entered the Capitol that day, who was charged with something, and he was a former, what was he? Well, anyway, whatever he was, a couple of things. One was he didn't sound like the type of guy who would be on meth. The other thing was, and of course he was claiming, well, I no longer think that the election was stolen. I did at the time, but of course that's what you're going to say once you're arrested, But this, I hadn't really planned to get into this, but the sentences so far strike me as lighter than I would have expected. Now, here's a guy who, what he told the FBI was, oh yeah, there was a little scuffle with the cop, but he just kind of fell on me, and then I kind of pushed him to get him off of me, and that's what he told the FBI. Then, like, the week the case is going to come to court, video surfaces where he's like punching he's fighting the cop. He's assaulting the cop. I don't know if they have the beginning so that they can tell us who threw the first punch, but in a sense, it doesn't matter. You're supposed to defer to the physical coercion of law enforcement officers, right? I mean, there are dead people who are now famous who failed to do that. And so it had been, I think that he was, but when that evidence surfaced, they didn't even increase it from a misdemeanor to a felony. It had been, I think, that they were planning, he was going to get 2 months maybe. And now they asked for 6 and the judge gave him 3. You got 3 months. You got the guy on video punching a cop on the day as part of an attempt to derail the constitutionally ordained process for selecting the president. You give him 3 months? I'm sorry. Is that just, my partisan blinders blinding me to the compassion and forgiveness I should show?
I wouldn't be upset if he got more, but there are some unfair. The QAnon shaman who didn't hurt anybody, as far as I could see, he just dressed wildly, was sentenced to jail, and that seems, it seemed like what he did was in the lesser category.
I think that costume alone warrants a jail sentence. If I just saw him walking down the street, I'd make a citizen.
I was gonna try to get a costume like that to wear today, but it was too elaborate.
Supply chain problems.
Amazon could not deliver the horns on time. What can I say?
Wait, more I have more on.
You have more. Okay,
we're not done.
There's more.
Wait, there's more. I had an epiphany. Well, first of all, a couple things. Listening to, I'm not sure what part you thought was overdoing it. I don't know if you mean all the media attention, but the media attention kind of convinced me of something. Go ahead. What was overdoing?
They have this big commission, and they haven't come up with anything. The whole point is to get Donald Trump to see that he is more culpable than we might have thought, because he called into Steve Bannon, or he said, damn it, I'm not going to call them off. They're doing my bidding, or something like that. And they haven't, they're celebrating themselves, but they don't really have much. They had two little pieces of evidence. One, they had Stephanie Grisham say that he was excited by the violence. And they had an unnamed person saying that he hesitated for 20 minutes to put in the line in his tweet, be peaceful. Okay. It wasn't even 20 minutes. It was a little less than 20 minminutes. Yeah. And so
that is an important 20 minutes, I would say, but go ahead.
It's an important 20 minutes, and I would impeach him for 20 minutes, but he's not president anymore. So I just think they're celebrating themselves and celebrating Dick Cheney. I'm sure you appreciated that on the floor of Congress.
Liz more than Dick, right? Or what they say
Dick
about
was
Dick?
there. They were all palling around with Dick.
Did you know that during the I guess it was like the night before, when Trump singled out Liz Cheney by name, Dick, her father, called her. This is maybe January 5th or early January 6th. Told her that, said, did you know that Trump has done this? I'm worried about your security. And they talked about it, and they talked about whether she should proceed with her plans to say something or other or vote something. I forget. But as I understand it, like that was the frame of mind she was in when those guys broke into the Capitol. So I have to spare a little moment for sympathy for her.
All those people were legitimately terrified, and that's obviously part of why they're making such a big deal of it, because Pelosi and AOC and all those people legitimately feared for their physical safety. I mean, it's a little like this demonstration down the street on Rodeo Drive. The Black Lives Matter people said, we were just peaceful. We were pounding on the windows, but we were peaceful. And the people inside said, we were terrified. They were pounding on the windows. Well, they were legitimately terrified. And Pelosi and, there's every reason why this would be a searing experience. But, if you step back and look at its larger place in American history, it's not as important as they're making it out to be.
Well, as to your complaint that the commission doesn't have anything like a smoking gun, and I don't have any reason to think they'll ever find one. On the other hand, there is some evidence that they're still trying to get a hold of, right? Communications involving the war room.
If they said we need more time so we can get evidence, and if Trump would just, if we get this phone call that he made to Bannon, we'd be getting somewhere. What I don't understand about these phone calls, and I don't think you'll have the answer, but I don't have the answer. My understanding was that all phone calls are recorded. And it's just a question of, can you retrieve the tape recording?
No. I don't think so. I think the metadata, who you called. Now, texts seem to live forever, so far as I can tell, judging by how long after the fact they're dredged up. But no, our phone calls are not being recorded unless there's something we don't know going on.
Okay. Well, then they can't.
God, that would be a horrible world to live in. How would you go on living if that were the case? That would be terrifying.
Well, I think that was the world.
Of things people
I think that was the
world.
I think that was the world Europe was living in after 9/11. I think we recorded we took every phone call made in Europe and ran it through a computer. I don't know if we saved it.
I think that's right. There was a massive. It may have been a subset of those, but they used the excuse of there being a foreigner involved in the call as justification to actually record a ton of voice calls, as I remember.
And they ran it through a computer in Scotland, I believe. And
Uh,
the American calls were run through a windowless building in Tribeca.
You're making that up?
Correctly. No, I'm
No?
not making it up.
uh,
So anyway,
So wait.
why would they not do that? They have the capability of doing it, so you'd think they would do it.
Well, they don't have the capability of doing it.
Well, if they run every phone call in Europe through a computer, they can run every phone call in America through a computer.
But it wouldn't hold up in court, I don't think.
Well, that's the legal. They didn't have the legal justification, but
Well, technically, it's possible, I suppose. But I think the metadata is actually kept by the carriers. Like I think the feds get that from AT&T.
But anyway, if they just said we don't have the evidence we want nailing Trump, but we're digging and we think it's there, that would be one thing. But they didn't do that.
Apparently, Merrick Garland gave a speech this week where he kind of pointedly did not rule out the possibility of ultimately prosecuting Trump over this, which I think would be a huge mistake unless there's a major smoking gun. But
well, everybody's desperate for somebody that's going to knock Trump out of the race. And in retrospect, Pelosi's attempt to impeach him and disqualify him has more merit. I still think it's crazy, but it has more merit than we gave it at the time. Because at the time we were under the delusion that Trump would fade away. He's clearly not faded away, and it would be good if he were constitutionally disqualified from running.
He certainly hasn't faded away, but I thought it was interesting that apparently he canceled his January 6th appearance after a number of actual Republican Congress people made noises about it not being a great idea. He seemed to was he deferring to actual wisdom or what? That doesn't.
He seemed to be deferring to actual wisdom. Yeah, no, that was a good sign. I agree, but weird. I mean,
I figured he'd have them all primaried.
But if he's being smart and not rigid, that just means he's more likely to survive. So that's not good.
So let me.
Okay,
go ahead. Although I'm going to ultimately insist on saying more about January 6th, but go ahead.
I was going to segue to the voting rights dispute. So say what you want about January 6th.
Let me say something that touches on that, and then I want to close with an epiphany I had that actually isn't that impressive. But just in listening to the coverage, the podcasts and stuff about this, I have been reminded of what a creep Trump is and how many things there are you could, in principle, impeach the guy for. I mean, when he calls the Secretary of State in Georgia and literally says, I need 12,000 votes, right? That's how he put it. I mean, that is major interference with a very important process. And I was more convinced that there are afoot right now initiatives in many states sponsored by Republicans that are collectively worrying in terms of changing the rules for how the elections are conducted in the state, or just along another dimension, the number of stop the steal boosters who are running with Trump support in many cases for offices of significance in the administration of elections.
What's an example of something you're worried about? Because I'll tell you what I'm worried about.
As I understand it,
really
unless I got this wrong from a Times podcast today, Brad, is it Roethlisberger, the guy who was the stand-up guy, the Republican Secretary of State in Georgia. He's the guy who Trump called and tried to get him to fiddle with the votes.
Technically, Trump thought he was covering himself because he said, "Can you find 12,000 cases of fraud?" Or it was. Well,
he at some point said, "We both know that." Yeah, I mean, of course, he always says.
He didn't say,
he
didn't say steal 12,000 votes from me.
Mickey, Adolf Hitler would have remembered. You should never bring up Hitler, I know, but Adolf Hitler would have remembered to say, just for the record, of course, I really did win the election. Now, in Trump's case, I grant you, he probably believes it. I don't know. But in any event, just making that phone call and using the phrase, I need you to find 12,000 votes is kind of fishy. Anyway, the reason I mention him again is because apparently in Georgia, I think the state legislature has actually now changed it so that his position is no longer an elected position, and the state legislature appoints him. And
I don't think that's what I think they cut him out of. They eliminated his. They took away some of his powers.
Well, I heard that too. I heard that
themselves
too.
in charge.
Okay,
my fear is
but it's significant. It's not nothing.
My fear is that if you look, Bill Sherrod wrote a pretty good article for the Washington Monthly where what they really want to do is take over Fulton County, which is the big Democratic county where they've always suspected there were shenanigans. That's where they pulled the box from under the table, et cetera, et cetera. And Bill Sherrod points out it's actually they've put a lot of hurdles before they can do that. There have to be various findings of incompetence, et cetera, et cetera. Now they can still do it, but the biggest fear is that they will just send their electors. They will say, okay, we think, Trump won the election, and send their electors to Washington. That seems to me the biggest vulnerability in the constitutional scheme is the power it gives state legislatures to send whatever electors they want. They don't even have to have a vote, Bob. They can just they can just say, okay, we're going to decide who the electors are. That nobody's tried that for a century, but, it didn't used to be a direct election of electors. And there's nothing in the Constitution that requires a direct election of electors. So they can just say, okay, we'll decide who won the election, and we decide Trump won. And what are they going to do about that? Instead, the people in Washington, rather than defending against that, are defending against the opposite case, where the state sends the right electors and Trump tries to get Pence to throw them out. So they're saying, okay, we need a supermajority to throw them out. Well, if they send the wrong electors, the supermajority makes it worse. Then you'll never get rid of them. Then, they're fighting the last war instead of fighting the war that's coming, which is similar to the war that's coming is similar to what George W. Bush was going to do in Florida, which is have the legislature send Bush electors to Washington, even if the courts said that had a recount and said that Gore had won. So we need to fight the 2000 battle, not the last battle of 2020. And what they're talking about, even when they get around to talking about changing the Electoral Count Act, which they're not doing because the Democrats want to talk about their various mail-in ballot bullshit, which is solely designed to expand the Democratic vote and not deal with this threat.
Well, the Republicans
if they finally get around to dealing with the Electoral Count Act, they're fighting the wrong battle.
Okay, but first of all, the Republicans have been making real changes at the state level that are designed to and do reduce the number of Democratic votes.
Well, but they're rolling back all the pandemic, mail-in extravaganza changes that were supposed to be a one-time temporary thing just for the pandemic. We send mail-in ballots to everybody so they don't have to go vote.
Fine.
Of course, you want to roll those. You want to roll those back once the pandemic recedes.
I'm just saying the motivations on both sides are partisan. But I want to get clear on what you say is the next battle, which is what state legislatures just decide to send to defy the will of the voters in their state, or what?
Well, they would phrase it as, we think there was fraud here, or we think that this is the correct count, or we're going to disqualify these ballots. We think that Trump actually won, so we're sending Trump electors. I don't think that's very likely. I do think there's reason to be concerned about some of the other things I described. Just the number of kind of Trump groupies who are going to wind up in non-trivially influential positions in the administration of elections. But the courts will still supervise them, and unless you're willing to throw out the courts, that's what'll carry the day, I think. The problem is that states might be willing to throw out the courts, and that's the threat that I'm talking about. In Florida, they were going to ignore the state Supreme Court. Okay, and say, we're the legislature, we choose the electors. It's right there in the Constitution. The legislature chooses the electors. So that's the problem.
That's not what it says. No, it says and you quoted it correctly on Twitter this week. It says the legislator shall choose the manner in which the electors are selected. Right. So that means they certainly can say in advance, the legislature can say popular vote determines who the electors are, and that's what they tend to say. But the Constitution doesn't say that after the election, the legislature can say, just kidding, the manner we prescribed in accordance with the Constitution, we've decided to change. No, any court would say, no, it's too late after the election. You can't just change the rules.
They would probably say that, but of course, there's an out that they could say. They could say, we will choose electors by popular vote as we decide the popular vote went. We, the legislature, decide who won the popular vote.
Well, I agree.
Or they could even say the popular vote is advisory. Nothing in the Constitution says. They could say we make the call, we decide, and as long as they say that in advance, it passes your test. That's
sure, if they say it in advance, you're exactly right. They can specify any procedure they want in advance of the election. But if the popular election is the means they have specified for choosing the electors, they got to stick with that. Now, you're right. They might, after the election, say, well, we've decided that due to this bit of shenanigans we claim happened here, the actual popular vote outcome is this, not that. But I suspect that would be challenged in court. And I suspect right now, at least, unless Trump has another 4 years of appointing judges, right now, at least, most courts would, at that point, say, no, you're screwed. But I think it might go all the way up to the Supreme Court, and fine.
I think it would, and I think you're right that now they would. But in Florida, that's what they tried to do, and I think they would have gotten pretty far with it. They tried to do exactly that and say they hadn't specified it in advance, but they were going to say we're choosing our electors because we think Bush won this state, and how are you going to stop that? The only way to stop it, if Congress doesn't overthrow it, which it probably wouldn't, and it certainly wouldn't if they require a 2/3 vote. The only way to stop it is if the Supreme Court intervenes. Now, in 2000, they might have intervened the wrong way. I don't know. They probably would have intervened the right way. But I agree that that's the only hope is that the Supreme Court will stop it. And that's why I don't think it is the in the threats to America, it is a very, very serious threat with a low probability of happening. But so that's why I don't spend all my time worrying about it.
Maybe I'm a sucker, but the elite liberal media managed to get me concerned yesterday.
The Democrats have been fabulous at turning out their votes. They've been wildly successful. They'll be wildly successful in 2024 too. Nothing's going to stop it.
Well, yeah, but it's politics is a game.
They may have to go to the polls instead of mailing in. The other point about what the Democrats are doing, it's another exercise in base pleasing. The people who are concerned about this are saying we have to change. Now, you may disagree, but the people like Professor Hazen are saying, don't worry about this voting rights stuff, the stuff that you're talking about, the changing in the mail-in ballots, et cetera, et cetera. Worry about this Electoral Count Act where the states could send either bogus electors or, Pence could throw out good electors. Let's amend that. And the Democrats, Schumer, are saying, no, we don't want to focus on that. We want to focus on our voting rights things that our base cares about, which are going nowhere because they're not going to be able to change it. Well, obviously, This is theater, and eventually they're going to come back to Professor Hazen's thing. The saving grace there is they have time because the election's not till 2024, so they can go through the 2022 election and still change it in time for the election in 2024. They can change it in 2023. Of course, the Democrats won't be in charge then. So if they really wanted to control what happens with the Electoral Count Act, they would say, sorry, base, we're not getting anywhere with your voting rights stuff, but we do have the votes to change the Electoral Count Act. And there's some Republicans who have said they might be amenable, Senator Toon among others. So this is another case of them going through theater to please the base, as opposed to good government, which would say, do what Professor Hazen wants. Sorry. Okay.
You want my January 6th epiphany before we move on?
Yeah. You always want the epiphanies.
So I read a couple of pieces that were addressing kind of the same subject. First was one in the New York Times from, Sohrab Ahmari. He's a Trumpist who used to be New York Post op-ed editor.
Right. But he likes the child tax credit, so we don't like it.
I was afraid you wouldn't make that connection. So anyway, the connection I was going to make was, he goes through the root causes. He's talking about Trump's American carnage speech. And Amari says the symptoms of the carnage, stagnant real wages, pervasive health and job insecurity, the disappearance into thin air of America's industrial base, ruthless tax, labor, and regulatory arbitrage by corporations in the form of offshoring and open borders, the corollary decline in union power, ravages of fentanyl, on and on and on. I personally agree. Those are, in my ideal world, those are the kinds of issues that Donald Trump would have managed to show a spotlight on in a way that actually got the attention of Democrats. And they asked themselves, well, why did people vote for Trump? That would have been a wonderful world. But I think the world we're in is closer to the one that John Harris wrote about the same day, I think. He's the founding editor of Politico, of course. And he wrote with respect to the root causes of the anger that brought Trump into power. He writes, quote, "The more the vitriol has risen, the less consensus there is about the origins of the anger. To the contrary, there is something closer to an establishment consensus that the search for root cause is folly. The Trump phenomenon defies explanation, and the threat posed by his demagoguery makes speculation about its origins an irrelevant distraction." My epiphany was just to realize that, I already knew that Trump, his base deserved better. They had some real grievances. They deserved a serious politician who would actually try to address them and articulate them coherently, and force the Democrats to respond on those terms. What I hadn't really realized is that January 6th and the whole Stop the Steal movement that Trump initiated ended any possibility of the Democrats taking a good look at root causes. It really is true that now that just sealed the kind of resistance narrative that these Trump voters are crazy. I mean, after all, most Republicans do believe there was electoral fraud, which there is no evidence of, and so given the imagery of January 6th and everything, I do think that whole thing just consolidated the view that, hey, these people are fucking crazy. Don't tell me about their goddamn grievances. They're nuts.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I do think it makes it much worse. I tend to write it off just as Trump going crazy, but if I was a Democrat, I would write it off as saying all Republicans are crazy. But a 2022 shellacking might bring some sanity to the Democrats and restore. I mean, if the defund the police and all the woke craziness kills the Democrats in the midterms, surely saner voices will prevail in the party, and they will moderate it. The problem I have, and I Amari's list is fine. I agree with 90% of it as in terms of the root causes. Even that I don't think gets at the disquiet at the root causes. The root cause, we've talked about this, even if all those things, even if we restored the economy and did some onshoring, and people aren't happy with the way society is going because the society is heading toward a future where machines take their jobs, and they're either in the Michael Young pathway of a meritocratic hell where society is divided into classes on the basis of skills and smarts, or we're headed for a corrupted Michael Young pathway where everything's doled out according to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And people aren't happy with that. And even implementing a lot of Trumpist policies isn't gonna undo that disquiet. That's, I think, the problem.
No, I agree. I mean, I think the one thing Trump did was take a problem, as for the where did our jobs go problem, I think most economists would tell you at least half of that problem is automation. And one thing Trump did is convince people that no, it was a combination of trade policy and immigration. But And that's part of what you're talking about. I think it's not the only thing. You're also talking about how just like social media and everything is changing the nature of community in ways that people find uncomfortable.
There's that, and there's also even jobs that used to have discretion are being proletarianized. So doctors and lawyers are unhappy because their jobs have been routinized, and private equity is taking over all sorts of areas like healthcare that used to be run by professionals. So I do think that if we brought production home and had manufacturing jobs in America and had a national service and had a universal health care and seemed to have some purpose to all these efforts, like going to outer space or curing disease or something, what are we all doing it for? The answer of the meaning question, voters would be a whole lot happier than they are now. But and a lot of that is Trumpiness. I mean, and a lot of that is standard Democratic politics. The only issue where Sherrod Brown is really at odds with Trump is immigration. I mean, in terms of onshoring, he and the Trumps are in accord.
Do we still think the reason Sherrod Brown can't run for president next time around is because he has skeletons in his closet?
I mean, not because he champions the refundable child tax credit? That's a disqualifying factor.
The answer to that question is yes, not because of that.
I don't know. I know nothing about Sherrod Brown. I assume
he is in principle the ideal Trump-killing candidate on the Democrat side, right?
He is a Trump-killing candidate, yeah.
Well, if he doesn't have a skeleton in his closet, he should get out on stage.
People were rightly terrified that Biden would pick him as his vice presidential candidate, in which case Trump would be dead.
No way you were going to get a white male on that ticket, even if Biden hadn't made the promise.
Well, we got the wonderful Kamala Harris with that kind of thinking, Bob.
No, I'm just saying, I'm not advocating. I'm just saying that was the reality of the political reality these days of having one white male on the ticket in the Democratic Party. You're probably not going to get a second one. If he hadn't made that pledge, he might have chosen somebody like Cory Booker, who would have been, I think, a much more appealing heir apparent and would have me much less terrified about what lies down the road than the current occupant.
Talk about potential scandals.
Oh yeah. Oh, what?
I don't think he has any scandals that reflect on his character or ability.
But things that would be perceived as scandals.
There are a lot of people who think he's gay.
I was going to say we'll save it for the Parrot Room, and we were going to make tons of money off of that tease. Maybe.
And I have some evidence to the contrary, but so I'm not sure he's gay, but he has an interesting personal life.
You somewhat famously have the least discerning gaydar in the world, right?
No, I have perhaps there are a lot of false positives.
I was going to say you said it to err on the side of false positives.
But anyway, I like Cory Booker. He's smart and he is spontaneously funny in a way that most politicians aren't. So his failings are in the administrative area, and
we can overcome that. He also has failings in the foreign policy area, but it's a testament to what a mess the world is in that I'd rather see. I wouldn't mind seeing him as vice president. Quickly,
the Democrats have a person of color who is a good administrator, who talks no bullshit to the American people, who is not beholden to the left wing, yet he has sterling left wing credentials. He just happens to be over 80 years old. It's Willie Brown.
Oh.
I would vote for Willie Brown in an instant.
Well, he's good friends with Kamala Harris, as I understand it. So maybe
he just gave another something out. He just gave another terrific interview. Supposedly Kamala Harris was not wildly happy with the op-ed he wrote about her.
I'm sure he could have written one she'd be less happy about, unless I'm mixing him up with somebody else. But
anyway,
we digress.
If we can't get Willie Brown, Cory Booker
that will elaborate on in the Parrot Room. How does that sound? Willie Brown, Kamala Harris, Parrot Room.
Well, they were an item. Everybody knows that. So what's the
Mickey,
problem?
for God's sake.
But that isn't even scandalous.
You're just destroying every
That
great
isn't even
revenue model I
scandalous.
come up with.
We have plenty to talk about in the Parrot Room. Don't worry.
Well, we'll get to that quickly. Final warning sign about where we are is the headline of Michelle Goldberg's piece in yesterday's Times is, quote, the headline, "Are we really facing a second civil war?" So now, wait, it's the conventional wisdom that we are?
Yes. Among the left, everybody thinks that we're heading toward a civil war.
Oh, shit.
Well,
We may be, but...
we haven't talked about COVID yet.
Yeah, we should get some of that in quickly because we're approaching, we're at 50 minutes. So
it just seems to me that we're at this weird period where Omicron is sort of appearing more like the savior as opposed to the menace, because it's come out that it does provide some immunity against Delta. So if it takes hold where Delta is prevalent, that's a good thing because it doesn't seem to kill very many people. And what's also become clear is that while all the focus is on Omicron on the coast, in the heartland, Delta is still raging. So the question is, wouldn't it be a good thing if we actually sent a bunch of people who were infected with Omicron into the heartland so that everybody could get Omicron and be immunized against Delta, partly?
I think you are
the Delta
ideally
is still
suited.
killing people. The Delta is still killing people.
You're ideally suited to write that op-ed, because if I wrote it, they'd think my agenda was to kill Trump voters. I think you should write that. By the way,
Delta is what's going to kill the Trump voters, not Omicron.
Well, I know, but not everyone accepts that Omicron is not, and it remains a little unclear to me how threatening it is or isn't. I mean, certainly the symptoms seem milder, less lung congestion, more like a head cold. But I would say the stats are still kind of bedeviling. I just want to add a wrinkle to something I said last time.
I think even Fauci has said that it's less deadly now.
Well, then it don't.
Yeah. Okay. But anyway, go ahead.
I don't have to finish the sentence, right? So last time I just made the point that the studies you read about, where they say, we compare people who just entered the hospital with Delta to those who entered with Omicron, or the people who get Omicron are more likely to enter the hospital or stay longer. With Delta are more likely to enter the hospital, stay longer, whatever. I made the point that, the Omicron population almost certainly has a higher percentage of vaccinated people because they are so resistant to Delta. And I said, what you want is an apples to apples comparison where, for example, you say comparing unvaccinated people who get Delta to unvaxxed people who get Omicron, and the numbers they come up with there is that the reduction of risk is just 10, 20, 30%. But then I realized it's even that is a dubious stat, because I think the unvaxxed people in the Omicron population are more likely to have had Delta or some prior variant by exactly the same logic that led me to posit that the Omicron population would have more vaxxed people. So it's very hard to find a true apples comparison. Unvaxxed who have had no version of COVID in the Delta population versus the exact same people in the Omicron, or vaxxed people who have whatever. Anyway.
Well, it's a good point, but it also means that it can still be true that it's more mild. It's just very difficult to prove.
Sure, I suspect it is. I suspect
most people who've resisted the idea that it's more mild have come around to it. It's both more mild and it only part of the low death toll is the previously vaccinated people, but part is also that it's milder. And if it does, the doctors who are on the front lines tend to say it doesn't go into the lungs, don't they? So, that's...
Oh, I think it's pretty clear
that's the testimony that I believe.
I think that it's clear that it spends much less time in the lungs than in the upper respiratory system.
Yeah. Anyway, the other thing that's happening there is that we're waiting for Biden's push to normalcy. The pivot. It's one of the pivots he's supposed to make. He's supposed to pivot away from BBB, and he's supposed to pivot away from COVID to talk about what voters really care about.
Which is?
I'm not holding my breath.
Wait, what is
inflation? They care about inflation and employment, and they care about normalcy, getting back to normalcy after COVID.
This employment thing, the way they always frame the number relative to expectations. It's like I heard the headline on NPR today. For the second month in a row, the job numbers were worse than analysts expected. Well, it sounds like we should fire the fucking analysts then. I mean,
the only way it makes sense is that it does. If you're in the stock market, you've priced in. You've priced in how the Fed is going to react, and the Fed is probably going according to expectations. And if the reality defies the expectations, then the Fed is probably going to do something different.
Right. That's what is shaping the coverage, is they are correctly characterizing whether this is good news or bad news for the stock market, because that depends on what the expectations were the day before. But that's not what I want to know, And I suppose, in a sense, what is news is the departure from yesterday's conventional wisdom. Still, it's like if you look at the employment curve, it's just this smooth, since we were 25 million jobs below normal at the beginning of the pandemic, the number has risen, and as it approaches the previous level, the curve gets less and less steep. That's the way these things work, and that's what the last 2 months jobless numbers have done. It's like I don't know.
You accept that if it was negative, that would be bad. We added 200,000 jobs. If it had gone down 200,000 jobs, that would be bad.
I even expected if it were more positive, it would be better. It's just. Anyway, it's a.
You're right.
So, wait, there was one more. Oh, speaking of normalcy, I gather, what was the deal? Some Biden. It's people who were on Biden's transition COVID team. So some real COVID experts, health experts who were advising him after he won the election, I think. And a number of them wrote pieces saying, we need to, I think the upshot was, we need to quit talking about victory over the virus and start talking about how you reconcile a normal life with the persistence of some variant of this virus, if I've got that right. Do you favor that?
But one of them is Ezekiel Emanuel. Wasn't he supposed to have committed suicide by now?
Wait, remind me who he is. I saw that name.
He's the guy who said he was going to kill himself when he got to 70 because he lived long enough.
Oh, is he?
I think that's...
How old is he?
I don't know. But
well, I'm going to Google that.
It'd be awfully close.
In the Parrot Room, folks, we will know Ezekiel.
It's weird how the Emanuel brothers, all of whom are brilliant.
Oh, that's Rom's brother?
It's weird how they've all sort of semi-tarnished themselves. I mean, Rom was mayor of Chicago, but he got into trouble because of this video of this cop shooting an unarmed teenager that wasn't released, sort of unfairly. Mm-hmm. I sort of like Rom. Ari is a complete jerk who's runs a big talent agency out here that failed to go public, and he was just kicked out of a $300 meal vegetarian restaurant in New York for throwing a snit fit. So everybody's realizing he's sort of a jerk. And Ezekiel, is failing to follow through on his promise to end his years on Earth.
You should host a reality show called Keeping Up with the Emanuels. You're very well versed. That's impressive.
Anyway, but I sort of want to wait till the numbers go down more before I declare normalcy. I mean, in California, we don't have it that bad. The case rate is going through the roof, but the death rate is barely budging. And it's pretty low. So we're in much better shape than the rest of the country. And
Britain should be the canary in the coal mine because they were, about 10 days ahead of us on Omicron. And I don't think their numbers have gotten alarming yet in terms of deaths, or even in that case, hospitalizations. Our hospitalizations have gone up, but
hospitalizations have gone up. In California, the hospitalizations have gone up, but not the ICUs. So that's seems to be the That if you look at hospitalizations, we're scared. If you look at ICUs, not so scared. If you look at South Africa, where they're already through it, but they were heavily infected already. So,
well, we are, yeah. That's
anyway,
true,
I'm not ready to pivot to normalcy yet. Maybe I'm a hypochondriac.
By the way, I'm looking at the UK numbers in the last 3 days. The case, like I said, they're the canary in the coal mine. The case numbers have been flat, and I don't think that's a function of the holidays. But in any event, the death numbers aren't up.
The fact that I want to move to Florida and live there for the rest of my days should not be taken as any endorsement of Governor DeSantis' policies. Of course.
No, it should not. And by the way, I may be slightly wrong about UK deaths. Maybe the last 3 days are collectively alarming, but time will tell because the holidays did screw things up. Sorry, I interrupted your Florida riff.
No. Anyway, I mean, it does seem like Florida's a lot. You can point to individual DeSantis policies as misguided, but it does seem like writ large, Florida is doing better than the other states, and it may just be a climatic difference that hot climates did better than cold climates. But
well, certainly
it looks like
in the
Florida
winter
is the place you want to be.
Well, the pattern is that the summer is bad for the South COVID-wise because they're indoors with the air conditioners on, and the winters are bad for the North for the same reason. They're indoors.
Good point. But in general, they've kept their economy going. Kids are in school. And, the people that are dead, and their death rate is not that much worse than anybody else. So maybe they made the right call.
So, you want a COVID segue to the Parrot Room? Not that we have to.
No. Do we do it?
We don't have to segue right now, but I will say one thing I'm going to talk about in the Parrot Room at patreon.com/Parrot Room. After this is, I listened to the whole Joe Rogan show with Robert Malone. Did you pay much attention to that?
I don't know how much of a kook is he?
Well, that's funny. You should put it that way because, first of all, I want to say on his behalf, I don't think he should have been kicked off of Twitter. He raises questions in the interview that somebody should address. I'm curious about. That said, I'm going to play you a couple of clips and ask you whether those are signs of a kind of craziness. Because I think I think there's reason to think he's kind of lost perspective a little, and I think there's solid speculation as to why, what drove him over.
Okay, great.
Whatever edge he may or may not have been driven over, and you will be the one who judges that question.
Can't wait. We have a whole lot to talk about in the Parrot Room. We have the Epstein case and the Maxwell verdict. Will it be overturned? Is it part of a cover-up so large, et cetera, et cetera? We have, does everybody want to date AOC? We have Ben Smith starting his new elite publication with Justin Smith, who has always wanted to start new elite publications. We have, I watched the Leonard Bernstein thing on the Beatles, even if you didn't, Bob.
But I did watch more of the Beatles documentary. I'm now halfway through, and I'm confident that I can finish it before I die.
Yeah. The Leonard Bernstein thing was eye-opening. Anyway, I'll talk about that. We have William Kristof performing Sub-Couse in Oregon. Couse at least qualified for the ballot in California, Bob. Did Kristof qualify for the ballot?
You don't mean William Kristof, isn't that what you said?
Nick Kristof. Running for governor of Oregon, the Secretary of State ruled he didn't meet the residency requirements. Now,
yeah, and he's pissed.
He's gonna take it to the courts, and he may win eventually, but may win and at least get on the ballot. We have
this is Nick Kristof, the columnist for the New York Times, of course.
Well, that's a lot. We have
It's not the end either.
We have crime in Beverly Hills. I know people are eager to learn about that.
Yep. We
have some readers who've amended what's terrible about the word gaslighting, and I think they're right about that. Anyway, that's what I got to talk about.
Okay.
I also had this annotation here. It seemed to say better white. And I said, Mickey, have you become a complete racist? It's better white? What is this? And it turned out, of course, it was Betty White. Could talk about Betty White.
I thought it was going to be better white than dead, and I agree. Better any ethnicity than dead. But yeah, Betty White. Let's talk a little. I want to talk about Betty White.
Okay. Now,
not a commonly expressed sentiment. But I want to talk about the good old darn days of Password. You know, she was married to, well, we'll save this for the Parrot Room.
Okay.
You know, she was a perfectly, I like Betty White.
But did she die because she took the booster? And apparently that's not true.
Wasn't she like 112 years old?
She was about to be 100, and they were preparing all sorts of ceremonies.
And you're looking for sinister causes of death?
My neighbors think that aren't taking the booster because they think it killed Betty White. And apparently
how old are your neighbors? How old are your neighbors?
Pretty fucking old. How old am I? Pretty fucking old.
Well, if they're only as old as you, tell them I said they're safe.
Okay, they're older.
But also tell them I said they're clearly past their prime. Okay?
They're not. They're in their prime. They're great. I love my neighbors. There's Peter Bogdanovich. Let's talk about Peter Bogdanovich.
He died. Let's talk about Peter. Everybody is dying. It's getting alarming.
I know.
Let's talk about him in the last picture show. I have something to say about how either deluded or dishonest he was. I mean, I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but
what about this?
On one occasion, in something he said to his wife. But go ahead.
No, where there's the whole thing about his girlfriend getting murdered.
Mickey. Oh, there's that. I had forgotten about that. We'll talk about that.
That was the most amazing part of his life.
If you want more COVID stuff, we can talk about Djokovic, who is currently imprisoned in a hotel in Australia.
If you want, anyway,
arguably the world's greatest tennis player.
Okay.
Finally, I don't know. I guess I shouldn't pass judgment on Don't Look Up until I actually finish it, which could happen, but I've watched most of it. And I don't know. I'm thinking about reprimanding Greg Gutfeld, even though
he must have mocked Don't Look Up.
No, I would forgive him for that.
Okay,
I would forgive him for that. I replied to the tweet that of his, so I'm not doing this behind his back if I do it in the Parrot Room.
Okay. I'm very happy that I don't have a Don't Look Up take. I don't want to have a take on Don't Look Up.
Well, then maybe I'll skip that part.
No, I can listen to your take. Just
okay.
Don't expect to take from me.
I mean, also the Mike Pompeo weight loss program is something I think somebody should market. Have you seen a picture of him?
It's a little suspicious. Doesn't it look a little like he had that stomach thing done?
It looks like he had plastic surgery. He's unrecognizable. His face is transformed. He literally is unrecognizable.
I agree.
Weird.
But it reminds me a lot of the Mike Huckabee scandal. Remember, it hasn't really come out, but some of the under news of the Mike Huckabee race was that he claimed to have this incredible weight loss due to pure willpower, and most people felt he actually had that thing done to your stomach where they cut out part of it because he ate a lot of little meals, which is what you do after you've had that. But he never admitted it. I don't think it ever came out because he never went anywhere.
Well, I think a related question is, I guess this doesn't tell us anything about Pompeo's political aspirations that we didn't already know, which is that he wants to be president, right?
He wants to be president so he can pursue a foreign policy that you don't like, I believe.
That would be one consequence.
He's not. I don't think he's going to be president.
I hope you're right. I think you're right, and I hope you're right. I agree. I don't think he was ever a very popular figure among any particular crowd.
We may end up supporting him because he may be the only guy running against Trump. So, that's a tough call. Do you vote for
Trump?
Pompeo against Trump?
Brings us back to January 6th, but we've perhaps said enough about that.
And I think I know somebody who might write the great Remnick takedown.
Oh, that's Parrot Room material.
Okay.
Great
Um,
Remnick takedown. That's David Remnick, editor of the New Yorker. And I'm not advocating a takedown of him. I like it.
It doesn't mean he's not good. Doesn't mean he's not great and fabulously talented and a wonderful person. It means everybody deserves a takedown, and he hasn't gotten his. That's what it means.
Returns us to the question of who is publishing the great takedowns these days. Perhaps that should be the new mission of the Non-Zero newsletter, which people
or of
should
Ben
subscribe
Smith.
to.
He had already took me down.
Well, that we will leave to Cow's Files, because you have the motivation of having yourself been victim of a Ben Smith written takedown, have you not?
Correct.
So you are exactly the impartial voice we turn to for a good sizing up of Ben Smith.
Well, because he's already done me, so he's not going to do me again, right? So.
No, I don't think he's going to do you again.
Yeah.
Although you never know, we'll talk about what his new publication is going to be like. It may be nothing but Mickey Couch takedowns for all we know.
That will appeal to the global elite.
Sure
that
will.
He's aiming for.
Sure will.
So, are we wrapping this up?
I think we should. It's been an hour and 10 minutes. And so we will be in the Parrot Room at patreon.com/Parrot Room shortly after you listen to this. Okay.
On to the takedowns.
Exactly.